is Ruoyun. Welcome to Real Talk with Ruoyun, where we set real expectations and standards in the business and marketing world. I am super excited today to have the amazing Shauna Nuckles of Advocation, and they are an amazing PR agency and also a training agency for PR so that agencies can grow. And today we're going to be talking about all of the nitty-gritty things of building out agencies. She and I have talked about this many a times, and we're talking about burnout. We're going to talk about how to avoid the high turnover. We're going to talk about like allowing your team to show up in a thriving environment, and we're going to talk about all of the things above. But before we get started, Shauna, can you please introduce yourself officially to everyone?
Yes. So thank you again so much for having me here. I am super excited myself too. These topics that we're going to cover are incredibly important to me personally, but they're also really the foundation in which we founded our company. So to build on to the introduction that you shared, which thank you, by the way, I am the founder of Advocation. We have two sides of our company. So I've got a PR agency, and we focus really serving brands and organizations in the health and wellness space. So better for you food products, natural beauty brands, and then we also support, medical device companies, digital health companies. We like to say anything that makes our life healthier and allows us to thrive as human beings that's our jam. So I've got that side of the company. And then really at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw this need and shift to support other PR agencies with this question of, how the heck are we going to get through the next year? So we support PR agencies with team training. So our whole philosophy is how can we create win-win-win situations for team members, clients, and also the agencies themselves. And what do really thoughtful, strategic, meaningful systems and operations look like inside of PR agencies, ultimately to reduce stress without sacrificing results? That's our big goal for our clients at the end of the day.
That's so needed. I mean, both ends.
Yes.
I love working with you for with our mutual clients because I'm like, you get it. Change makers actively making a
Yes.
change to better our world. Like they need someone that understands the passion behind them and also can support them to build that sustainable system to thrive. And also doing that for agencies. And that's so needed. Like you were talking about how it shifted for you with the pandemic, and let's start there because that's the context that we're walking in, right? Like there is a huge shift in the marketing arena for PR, for social, for marketing in general. And to for the listeners and the people watching this vidcast tuning in, I want to set some context before we go into the nitty-gritty to set the scene and why the work that Shauna does is so powerful. The work that I do a lot of when I guide clients into building their teams, both in-house and through agency, is so powerful. Is burnout is real. Burnout is insanely real
Mhm.
from last year. I mean, everyone's like, well, the pandemic happened, so everybody's burnt out. And I was like, yeah, but there's like another level of extreme for our arena because we
Yes.
were the forefront, right? Social media used to be, in my case, digital marketing, social media used to just be a interactive internet platform. And then we became the primary form of communication. So the poor
Yes.
social media managers were at the forefront. They were at the front line of discourse, and not just in handling like how does your business or organization is handling the pandemic, but also very tense and hard to navigate conversations like Black Lives Matter, like API hate, like the elections, and
Yes.
everything in between in the trash can of 2020 that we like to call it, right?
Yes. And on top of that, burnout, I'm working on an article right now for one of our trade publications, and I was chatting with a team member recently about burnout. And so, burnout, of course, isn't new, right? This isn't something that came to be from the pandemic. It was an epidemic in our industry and many industries before. So we built on top of that already stressed out state, right?
Mhm.
And we also saw in our industry in particular, overnight, everything changed on a dime, and all plans got thrown out the window. Many agencies were thrust into being crisis communication firms, whether they wanted to or not, because it's what their
Yes.
clients needed. And the funny part of that is I saw a stat that I pulled to include in this article that 92% of people are experiencing burnout right now, which is effectively everyone. We laughed because we said the other 8% probably just were sleeping and didn't take the survey.
Right? I mean, burnout, or I mean, I also like to say it's like, or they're like, I would say 4% of that just didn't take the survey, and 4% of that were actually decided to say, I'm tired of burnout and let me change my life in that
Yes,
burnout, right? And I was in the same way. So like actually sunsetted my agency, not particularly from burnout, but it was to your point, there was a underlying condition. In my case, it was that I was ready to exit my company at that time. And these underlying conditions that are usually what we call gaps, and all businesses have gaps because businesses and organizations are made out of humans. We are naturally imperfect. That's what makes us awesome. That's what I like to say. Humans are like onions. We are raw and messy, but we make a recipe taste good, right? Like that's who we are.
I like that.
And
I like
yeah,
that.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so there's gaps. There's always gaps, but in these very highly intensive, stressful moments like the pandemic, where it's like this moment of like, come to Jesus,
Yes,
of that level of stress. Like that, when we say crisis communication, it's not just a jargon word, it's filled and rifle with emotions. These gaps turn into chasms.
yes,
This is why you're hearing, and this is not just our arena of marketing. This applies to business across the board. This is
yes,
why you're hearing the restaurant industry having its own like epidemic moment where a lot of people are like saying, I can't do that minimum wage life anymore, or things like that. Like that was an epidemic, right? In our world, our epidemic was burnout and really no boundaries in terms of work
yes,
life balance. Like that was our epidemic that we had. And that was the gap. And then it turned into the chasm. And a year later, what I'm seeing as well on like in marketers in general is just a lot of people being like, I had my moment of realization that while I've done this for 10 years, I need to go do something else. I don't need to be a marketer anymore. And there's that moment. And so agencies overall are, as agency owners, like you face that moment of, oh shoot, like what do I do if my team just like dissipates, right? Like I was lucky in the sense that we set really hardcore culture boundaries of work-life balance in my agency. So my team didn't have that problem. But that is something that we hear again and again. So that's what we're gonna get into the nitty-gritty on and talk about. And like today we're gonna walk into talking about just the nature of like how do you grow? How do you scale? This is a conversation not just for agency owners. This is a conversation for anyone starting a business. We're talking a lot about our marketing world, but a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about, specifically like work life balance and deliverables and stuff, this applies to any service company, is my like,
totally, totally. Yes,
yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
Yes. So we're going to talk about today is applies to even if you run a service company or you're a marketing agency. So don't feel like this doesn't apply to you. Our goal for this today is to just start to have a conversation, because I don't know if you agree with this, Shauna, but for some reason there's like this perfectionism tendency. Like marketers have this like behind the magic curtain, like you
Yeah,
don't know this stuff because we put on the show. And we're just going to pull that curtain aside today and talk about what that looks like. So let's dig in a little bit. Like, we're in this a year, it's opening again, crossing fingers. I'm still waiting.
yep.
What do you think, Shauna, has like come out of this shift of like, if we look at hindsight 2020, what are some lessons learned and what people are taking on today?
Yeah, so a lot. There's a lot of lessons. And I think right now, what's most important is we don't move into the next phase of whatever the next normal looks like without really reflecting on those lessons. Because I think right now, and I know you will, this will live on the internet, so whenever you're watching this, take it with a grain of salt. But where we are right now, we're 15 months post, the beginning of the pandemic. We've got a full year under our belt of living and working like we have. But now it almost seems, in many states, what's happening in our country, like we talked about, it feels like there was a switch that flipped. So I connect with other agency owners every single day, and it went from feeling very dire in terms of new business prospects, in terms of clients not having the budget to retain PR and marketing services, to client, agencies who are like, we're doubling our revenue this year. We need to hire 5 new team members tomorrow. We've opened a new office. And this really, I mean, truly, it's happened over the last month. And I think that what's most important is we don't rush back into the way we worked before, because the pandemic really showed us that we have options. And I think
Yes.
that is what's going to be so key for retaining your talent, for retaining your sanity, for
Yes.
continuing to grow, is we really cannot build something new starting off broken. So,
Right.
but the piece of advice that I have, and really reflecting over the past year, is look at the next phase like it's the beta version. It's not going to be the end all be all. It's exciting and feels very encouraging that the purse strings are opening up, clients are looking and able to hire this type of support.
Yeah.
There, the horizon looks better than it did
Yeah.
just 2 or 3 months ago. But really, test fully remote versus hybrid versus how long you're spending in the office. Test different team structures, test systems, and then double down and invest in that foundational support that you're really going to need to carry you into the next stage. I think that we have to be really, really intentional with how we're going to operate in the
Mhm.
next phase of work life.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, let me clue a lot of people into this. Like, if you're a marketer, you probably suffered this as well. Like, our world prior to the pandemic was go go go. We worked all the hour. Like, to put in perspective, the average person coming in for marketing or PR or social, like, you're expected a 60-80 hour work week. Like, that was agency life. Like, that was what it was. And to Shauna's point is like, we were given options in 2020, being like, we don't wait, you don't need to work 60 days. What? You can have
I
a good
know.
lifestyle. You don't need to attend like 10,000 social events. Like, I don't know about you, but speaking of like being intentional of how I'm growing my business in this new stage, is being comfortable with boundaries of what I want to receive, right? Like,
Right.
being comfortable, like knowing what my sweet spot is, to your point of like how many clients to take on versus how many clients like are available to me to take on. And I don't know about you, but I've recognized in this year of solitude is that I don't want to hang out with people longer than 2 hours.
That's my max. I can be on for 2 hours and I'm done.
Right? Yeah, like that's okay. Like, we're extroverts. Like, I don't know about you, but I'm definitely an extrovert, but I've realized that I'm more of an ambivert. Like, I am
Got it.
extroverted tendencies, meaning like when the pandemic first hit, it got to a point that I was like, I just need to be surrounded by humans. I don't even need to interact with humans. I just need to be like around humans beyond my husband, bless his heart. And he was like, babe, just go to Marshall's. Just wear the
Just walk
mask and go
down.
to Marshalls. Yeah. Just shop around humans and Marshalls been my saving grace basically during the whole entire pandemic and everything. Um, but like that was a thing. And like if you put that in perspective, it's like, do you need to be in 6 meetings every single day? If your maximum ability to hang out with one single person is maybe 2 hours, like that changes the expectation of how many meetings we can jam pack into a day, right? Because we and like in the pandemic we had that zoom, like the zoomed out time, like converse, like that's a term because we couldn't handle that many meetings. And then if we think about it in perspective, it's like whether it's on Zoom or in person, could we really have handled that many meetings anyway?
Truly, yes. And these are the type of conversations that we need to keep having because the last year was a lot of band-aids. So we had a lot of band-aids that we put on to just make it work over the past year. And I don't know about you, but my experience with professionals in this industry is I think it's a superpower of ours to be able to operate with all the band-aids. Like we can operate under the worst, most difficult circumstances. We just make it work.
Yeah.
But it doesn't need to be that way. And we have this once in a lifetime opportunity to, we had a great reset. And
Yes.
why reset? To put back what wasn't working before. Not,
Yeah.
I love this industry. I fought tooth and nail to stay in it because I had my own experience with burnout. Once I had reached manager level in my career before I started my own company, and I had to get very serious about what do boundaries look like? How can I be as efficient as possible? What are the tough conversations I need to have? Because I faced this health crisis that if I didn't have those uncomfortable, vulnerable, hard conversations, the alternative was that I needed to find a different career, which is not what I wanted to do. And that was a real catalyst moment that I'm thankful for now because it put me on the path that I'm on today and really has served as kind of a big inspiration for our company. But yeah, we've got to be intentional in the next phase.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think like the reset to your point is a chance of like recognizing what's truly worth it. Is that half optimized? Like, let's be real. If you're working past 6 o'clock and you've been working since like 8 a.m., your brain can't function. Like, that's just like we're human. We're not machines, right? Like, that's just the thing. And so my question is that half an additional 2 hours or 1 or 2 hours that you're working past 6 o'clock going to produce the same results that you would do fresh face the next morning for half the time, right? Like there's like those little things. And it starts from the leadership. I think that definitely starts from leadership setting that tone. And I want to like slightly tangent into that. Like this is the reset. Like we're inviting so many agency owners listening in on this is that we have a choice in this. Like, we're not going back to normal. Normal doesn't exist anymore. This is a new chapter in this era of human society. It's awesome. A lot of it that came out from the pandemic, from just like a marketing and business philosophy, is that relationships matter. And like, if you're a business owner, you're like, well, relationships always mattered. And I was like, yes, but what do we toot as success? We toot market penetration, growth in revenue, et cetera, et cetera. We don't talk about number of new customers and retained customers and engaged customers, right? But notice the language has shifted in this last year where like in marketing for like social media marketing, for example, we're talking about engaged users, not likes and followers, which is what I called the vanity metric and I roll my eyes to infinity and beyond on, right? Like I'm like, do we
Right.
really need that? A, does your audience also exist? Like, if you're a local business in this space and you're not looking, how many potential customers can you have to warrant 100,000 followers? Like, is it truly at that number that you can handle? Right? Like, it's
Yeah.
that type of conversation where it's like, do you need 100,000 followers or do you really just need a set of 5,000 really engaged fans? Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And PR is a little bit different in the sense that it's always been a relationships industry. So there are, how do I put this? There are perks and, pros and cons to that. There, relationship based industries oftentimes are slower to innovate. So they're slower to kind of have technology to come in. It's a running, joke conversation that the tools available to PR professionals are just garbage compared to marketing, social media, advertising, SEO, all that jazz. Because really the way that we succeed, whether it's pitching the media, whether it's working with clients, whether it's finding collaborations, whatever the goal is, it is all dependent on relationships. So we really can't succeed without them. And yet, like you said, client retention is where it's at. I think that a lot of agencies, and not just agencies, but businesses in general, there's this idea of more sales, new customers, client acquisition. But I have had the fortune, the fortunate ability to look under the hood of, so to speak, of several different agencies. And those that have the most success, about, I would say at least 75% of their annual revenue comes from clients that they already have and have been able to retain. So that's usually the balance that successful agencies are looking at. It's really the bulk of honing those long-term, deep client relationships, serving them in ways that really impact their organization, and continuing to show up and invest in that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in services. Like, I feel like if someone were to Google and search, how do I grow a successful business? A lot of it is based on product based businesses. And a lot of product based businesses, what we're expecting in a return customer base is like 30 to 50%. You're expecting a 50% returning customer base and a
Yeah,
very strong word of mouth program to be successful, right? Services are totally different. Services are we're high dollar. So like the investment in the sales process is longer than a 24-hour period to fix like a toilet or something like that, right? Like it's super
totally,
high. Yeah.
totally. It could
Yeah.
be we see often a quick turnaround for someone to hire an agency, and that is they've decided that they need it and they're looking actively. Their process before they're ever in touch with you is much longer, but
Yes.
usually the minimum amount of time it takes us to start that process is 6 weeks
Mm-hmm.
if
Mm-hmm.
they've already decided to buy. But the fostering period where you're fostering that relationship can take years, because if you're buying a t-shirt or nail polish or whatever, you buy that on impulse. You're
Yeah.
not hiring an
Mhm.
agency on impulse. So that
Right.
business to business versus consumer mindset is totally different.
Yeah, absolutely. And like something that people don't realize when they think agencies is that they're also hiring they're like, "Oh, I'm just hiring an agency." I was like, "Yes, but you're hiring a team of people to join your team." Values and communication styles still apply. You're just interviewing high experts and being able to get someone versus without worrying about like bringing on a full employee. But it's the culture fit still a thing, right? In that
Totally,
space. Yeah.
yes. And
Yeah.
that's the sign of a great agency, is can they become an extension of your team? And a lot of that has to do with how familiar are they with your industry? Have they worked with other organizations like yours in the past? And like you mentioned, a big perk of it is more cost effective sometimes than hiring just a full-time employee, because you get an entire bench of experts
Mhm.
versus one person who likely has other duties beyond just PR, beyond just marketing, beyond just social media, right? So, but yes, that is the sign of, is this relationship going to sustain? Is how willing, how able are they to become that seamless extension of your own organization?
Right. And so if in that sense, it's like this is a long-term relationship. These are not designed to be churn and burn relationships.
Ideally, ideally,
Yes.
yes. That's, unfortunately, we see many companies who are in the position to hire an agency. They have a bit of a different mentality, and then they're like, this isn't working. Why isn't this working? And it's because you're starting and stopping momentum. It does take, for PR to work, it does take a little bit of a longer lead time to build up that momentum, right? It's all relationship based. We're not paying the media for you to get featured if we're looking at earned media coverage. So,
Yeah.
a feature in a product roundup or whatever it is. And it takes time. Those media want to test products, they need to have the time to become familiar with your brand. And if you start, stop with a new team every 6 months or even every year, they're never able to have that snowball effect, which is what is so powerful about PR,
Right.
is you're building that word of mouth, but it eventually turns into a beast of its own where you have a snowball effect where people are talking about you, the media want to talk about you, and so on.
Right. That's the wave of impact, right? It's the little drops, consistent drops create the wave
Yeah.
of impact. It's also what I say about social media is like you can't go from posting 3 times a week and then suddenly stop posting or like post 5 days a week and then stop posting kind of thing. Like you're just
Yes.
your people are gonna be like, hello from the other side. What's going on? Right. Like that's it's like that type of thing. And then so like just so that's like the value of like relationships. And I think both businesses need to understand that that's a thing and then also agencies need to think to that space. And I
Definitely.
also want to point out is that it takes it out of the hustle. And I think that's a really good thing to point out with this reset of the post-pandemic reset is that there's less of a need across the board for hustling, because people are focusing on building long-term relationships. And let me put it in financial understanding for those that let me break it down at the financial sense for those that are listening is that when I said for product based companies, you have a 30-50% base and you can continuously grow more because there's a faster reuse of the product because you're trying to just get the product, use the product, get another product, right? Like that's the life cycle of that. For services, it's a continuous retainer, continuous long-term relationship, as we've explained. With that being said, you're actually looking at 70%, to Shauna's point, 75% return customers. Because if you're constantly having to hustle beyond 2 or 3 more clients, that means that you have to build a full sales department. And to put it in retrospect, the size of these big tech companies out there. So we're talking like Oracle or Logitech or any of BigCommerce or any of these like super large companies that run big B2B enterprise. And if you look at how big their sales team is, that's what it will take if you're trying to have if you have a return customer base less than 75 because you're trying to constantly make this gap. And then when we're talking about profitability for agencies, which is like the bane of my existence when I ran my agency in the space, is like that difference of that 25%. If you are under your 75% customer rate, that eats into your base very often as well. And that base is the profitability measure for businesses, for service-based businesses. And so when you're getting to when you're what Shauna when Shauna says it's great to have more than 75% of return customer base, and that's a sign of a really successful agency, it's because you're not having to hustle every single time. And you get to pick and choose who you want to bring on as a client in the process.
Exactly. Yeah. And that is what it it's so difficult, especially for small boutique and mid-sized agencies. There's this constant push and pull where, no agency is not going to have any type of sales or new business process, right? We need to be able to market ourselves, have the ability to onboard clients in a way that makes sense and is compelling and kicks off great client relationships. So, no, even if you have a great base of returning clients that you're able to retain for the long term, sales isn't something that's going to go away. But to your point, it really is a fine line in the agency business model between delivering not just okay results, but results that get your clients to come back, maintaining that work-life balance so you're not working your team members to the bone, and having profitability. Because what's really unique about an agency, I love comparing the agency business model to products, because everyone understands how products work because we all buy them all day, every day.
Yeah.
And you can think about, inside of in product-based business, they have inventory, right? And you're keeping track of, okay, if you've got a shoe store, just for an example,
Yeah.
and you sell 75 pairs of shoes, you need to know that you have 75 pairs of shoes in the warehouse. So that's your inventory, right? Well, the inventory that we have to keep track of as an agency is your team's time. That is the service-based business
Yeah.
model. And
Yeah.
so few, it's very difficult to actually create systems and wrap your entire business model around doing that effectively, but it's not impossible. But that is the tricky challenge with
Yeah.
a service-based business, is your team's capacity is the inventory that's available for your business.
Yeah. And it's billable time. It's not just how many hours they show up each day. It's
Yes,
billable time too.
yes. And
And people need to understand that and to your point of working your team to the bone, if you're saying that you have it's billable time versus time available to
right,
work, because there is actually a percentage of time available that is designed as buffer space, and it's not and this buffer is it's the oil that keeps the wheel moving. That's and the reason being is because it's not about just the number of time available that your people have, it's the quality of work that they can do in that time, and that
precisely.
skill
Yes,
is
and this
what
is
makes
one
it
of
good.
my soapboxes.
Same.
So you may have just opened a can of worms, Warren, but I recently gave a workshop talk presentation to a group of agency owners, and the big trend that we're seeing in billable time, so we call it your utilization rate, which is how much of your time, your total time available, is going towards straight billable client work.
Mhm.
Truly, I don't know what it is, honestly, in the social media marketing agency world. Inside of PR agencies, the baseline that has been set for people who are just working on accounts mostly, so not necessarily a high executive who's doing a lot of new business marketing, team mentorship, etc., but just someone who is executing most of the client work, is 85 to 95%
Billable?
billable.
That's really high.
It is incredibly high, and it is incredibly difficult for agencies to meet that time. It's incredibly difficult for team members to meet that time. And we're seeing a big shift, because the notion around that is that's what it takes to be profitable. That's what it takes to deliver the results that are needed. But we're seeing that that's not true. And so
That's it. It definitely is not that true. It's like you can be smart about your time for sure. That's like when you said that, I was like, no. Usually,
well,
someone needs to charge their prices to be higher, in my opinion.
totally. And we really see this big shift because, like I mentioned, we get to look under the hood of all of these agencies. So we're like, what's actually going on here? Agencies are really struggling to meet that, particularly with the new emphasis on work-life balance. And that same that same productivity, that same ability to deliver results, there are agencies who can do it and are doing it closer to 65 to 70%, which is
That sounds more reasonable.
a big reduction in utilization rates. But we really see that as a trend coming into the next phase of business, that team members are going to be looking for that. So we say that utilization rates are kind of the next flex time, because before the pandemic, flex time is what everybody wanted.
Mhm,
We
mhm,
we released a white paper, and there was a stat in there that said before the pandemic, the number one perk that anyone wanted was flex time, but just 40% of employers in our industry were willing to offer it. That
mhm.
changed overnight. But now that next perk that we see professionals wanting, and I think soon are going to kind of demand from employers, is more reasonable utilization rates. And it'll be the one that employers are kind of resistant to provide because it is so tied directly to their profitability. But it's something that I think the next phase
Yeah.
of agency owners will need to figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like that, if you set that 90% of this is billable time is what we want, is that's the billable time, and that's how we make a profit. And then the next question when you look under hood is like, okay, well, how much of that equals to profit margin versus just like making bank, or like making bare minimum
Break
and
even,
covering
yeah.
expenses. Yeah. At that point, if I heard like if think of that and I just think of like the many mentorships that I had for my CFO, by the way, if you can as an agency or B2B service, invest in a CFO, a fractional one. They will be your saving grace. They are amazing in this, and utilization rates is one of those type of topics. And but I that's like setting yourself up for failure. It's like
Well, no wonder we're
it's
burnt out, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, and people are like, "Well, what do you mean?" And I was like, "If you for those of you that are only have only operated in the US, it's this is the resistance that you feel sounds normal. However, let me put it in an international context. Have you looked at the system of work and productivity in France or in other
Very,
places?
very different, very different.
Yes. Yes. And then like the thing that's really cool about um our world today is that we're so connected, right? It's not there's not a like American standard versus French standard versus Japanese standard versus whatever. Like, and it's like, oh, well, you're in America, so you got to do America. I was like, that doesn't work anymore because you're cross pollinating and you're working with different businesses. Most of your clients operate internationally. Like, it just doesn't work that way anymore. And so it's about figuring we're at the stage as a society to also decide like, well, what is as a human being, like whole world human being level, like what counts, right? Like to your point, it's like that what employees are going to be asking for and demand as the standard is a universal expectation that's not culture specific anymore because they see what's possible, right? Because what the pandemic was not exclusive to the US. The pandemic was international. It was the whole world. And
Yeah,
so everyone was forced to reset. And so this conversation is not about PR agency within the US. It's going to be about PR agency as a whole in the world. It's the digital marketing expectations in a whole in the world. And for those of you that are listening, when we're talking about these resets, right? Like we've already established the need of the reset. Let me get to a point so I can let me. If you've been listening this whole entire time, we've established the need for a reset. We're explaining. We've talked about the key pieces that decide can you do the reset, right? Because when most people hear about, oh, I need to do a reset, I need to do work life balance, the friction points are what we just described: utilization rate and how much you got to hustle for clients. Those are the two biggest drivers, and that resistance point that you're going to feel is that expectation to it. And also hiring and bringing on people in that space, right? Like we realize like it's no longer just about the job market, which is its own kettle of recruiting fish on its own, but there are basic four competencies. It's no longer just about how much you're getting paid. It's also about what is the life that you want, what is the environment that you want, because the big reset changed one key fundamental thing for every person in the world, or most of every person in the world, is what they value in their life. It's no longer what I call the traditional board game of life where it's linear and you're going in this direction. Um, and your how you succeed in life is materialistic goals. It's a video game and it's character development, right? It's free world and you can get the best sword for that can do $9,000 9,000 damage, but if you don't have your character developed, you can only wield 90 damage. Like that's real life, right? And so and that's shifting what we're demanding as a collective. And as agency owners, that's what we're seeing. Is that like a good reflection of
Yeah,
all the specifics that you're
absolutely.
seeing?
Absolutely. And we're also really seeing just a very quick evolution of the way the agency business model works. So the service-based business model, right, is not new by any means. It's been around for always,
Forever.
for
Yeah.
always.
Yeah.
But we really are seeing these new options in terms of how we're running, how we're hiring staff, and the people inside of companies are seeing that too. So really the way that we've worked has been in this kind of flux for the last however many years, and we see more people choosing to work in the gig economy instead of getting a 9 to 5. I know we've talked about, you and I have talked about this before, but there are options beyond just getting a job with a 9 to 5 employer that
Yeah.
are
Side hustle is the term these days. It's like get a side hustle and make it your
side
full-time job.
hustle. But we totally, and we're also seeing that people straight out of college or women who have had children and can no longer commit to agency work life are having this ability to earn a living, and not just some, measly few dollars here and there. People are building their entire careers outside of the walls of traditional employers,
Me.
right?
And
Right.
then I was like, I work 40 hours and I make triple what I used to make. Yeah, absolutely.
And people see that that's a possibility, and there are tools, there are professional collectives, networks, resources that are making this more able. More people are more able to pursue this. There are fewer resistances to being able to have make a living outside of having a 9 to 5. And I think that is also something that we're going to continue to feel the crunch on inside of agencies. Those who are going to really win in the next phase of business are going to have to roll with those punches, whether it's creating a really compelling company culture that people are excited to be a part of, whether it's learning how to actually leverage contractors. A lot of agencies really do struggle with that because it's tough, right? They're splitting their time between multiple different clients, whether it's white labeling with other companies. I do think in the next phase of business, agencies are going to have to get creative to continue delivering the results that really matter.
Yeah, and it's not trying to be the one-stop shop, right? Like if we think of like even 5 years ago when I started my company, my agency, see they're not me, it's like 5 years ago, like one-stop shop was a thing. And you're now having smarter businesses come to you. Like I was just talking to one of my clients and she has agentsified everything because she eventually wants certain elements in-house, but she recognizes that she's growing her business and stuff and she's agentifying it, but she's like, I don't believe that you can have everything in house unless you're the size of GSD&M. Like, you can't put PR and paid media and social all in one place
Truly,
unless
yeah,
you're the size of GSD&M. But I don't want to work with someone as big as GSD&M. Also, they're really expensive and I may not be able to afford them in that space, right?
yeah,
So who can I work with in agencies? And I think it's a shift, right? It's the to our original conversation, it's boundaries that are being set of what is our happy place. And part of that boundary setting is recognizing what I want, right? Like, for example, I have people that I know that look at my world and they're like, oh, that's so cool. I want to do my own thing. And then I have this disclaimer conversation. I was like, okay, I love you, but let's have a real conversation. Um, Entrepreneurship is not for the faint of heart. It's very romanticized in current culture and media. Let me give you the tea. And an easy thing, utilization rate. That one conversation makes them go, I don't know if I want that. And then my next
Yeah.
conversation is, can you hustle? Can you hustle and do the sales? Because I have a sales background, which is why I can just go whip it up and make it happen. Not everybody wants to do sales, right? And it's different. And that like these type of conversations that are having, but there's so much changing in the world. And I want to end on this note with you, Shauna, is that we've just touched the surface. For those of you that have been watching and listening, we've talked about the big major like variables that literally shift day in and day out. Can you feasibly be sustainable? Which is people coming in, from clients coming in, and the expectations and boundaries that are set there, and how you're bringing your employees in. Those are the two lifebloods of the business, right? We've touched on those. And if you're watching and listening, if you're interested in exploring more or and really get under the hood and see to make sure that you're optimized, because one of the big key things that we talked about is those are the lifebloods coming in. But if you're not set up for success in that utilization rate conversation that we just talked about, you're shooting yourself in the foot at the beginning, and it's just a very painful process. So talk to Shauna. Please reach out to Shauna and talk about what it means to set some realistic standards. Please set some realistic standards, because no one wants to operate 90% on billable time. Your brain can't handle that. like we're not machines. That's the big thing.
Yes.
We're not machines, right? But I would love to get this last question from you, Shauna, is on a final note is what is a big takeaway? Like what's like if one takeaway that someone can walk with today and to like start building, because the waves of change is ever flowing. Change is constant in our world. But what
Yes.
is one takeaway that you think an agency owner or a service-based owner can walk away with today?
I would bring it back to the point that we talked about earlier on perfectionism. So perfectionism, like we talked about, it runs rampant. I'm a recovering perfectionist myself. I have to put it
Same.
into check all the time. That put that aside as we look to the next stage, because we are many of us are going to be in a position where it's going to feel like we're crushing it. There's new exciting opportunities, but we do still need to hold on to that vulnerability and having very real, uncomfortable, messy conversations to move forward in a way with our team members, with our clients, to serve the next phase of our lives in business. So I think that is what I would recommend. That would be my big takeaway is let's keep perfectionism in the past. It's too 2019. So right. Right. So
Yes.
2021 is really moving into the next stage of business. Vulnerability is going to win. None of us have the answer. We're creating this together on the fly.
Yes.
And
Let's leave ego at the door. Yes.
precisely. So that would be my final parting words of advice.
Oh my God. I have goosebumps. That was beautiful. I love it. Yes. Let's leave ego at the door. Because no one like I mean, the classic saying, there's no I in team, right? But it's definitely about no one has the exact answer. If anything, 2020 taught us is that no one has the exact answer. But it's that curiosity and compassion and the willingness to collaborate. In that moment, we can collectively find an answer. And I totally agree with that.
Yes.
Like, yes,
Yes.
yes.
2020 taught us that we can figure it out.
Yes, we can figure it out and we don't have to do that alone. Well, thank you so much, Shauna. It was been it's so I like we can go on and on about all of
I
the
know.
things.
Yes, yes. I always enjoy chatting with you. And thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. I hope I didn't get on too many soapboxes. I really tried to not stay up
No,
there, but I'm
you were
very
perfect.
passionate about this. So I thank you for having me. It was an absolute pleasure.
I love it. Yeah, I think we just touched the tip of the iceberg. And that's the intention of this vidcast is we
Yeah.
wanted to touch on the main points so that you can start exploring different things. So feel free to reach out to Shauna. All of her info is in the info boxes below, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.
Bye.